My son-in-law sent me a voicemail. Pack your things, old-timer. My wife agrees you've overstayed your welcome in our home. I listened to it twice, then I smiled. By the end of that week, he had no car, no credit, and no roof. And I was sitting on a beach in Charleston with the best cup of coffee I'd had in years. Before we continue, subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're watching from right now. My name is Douglas Harlan. I'm 64 years old, retired after 35 years as a licensed general contractor in Charleston, South Carolina. Built houses for other people my entire career. Knew every code, every permit, every load-bearing wall in this county. When my wife Carol passed from pancreatic cancer 6 years ago, the house we'd shared on Wentworth Lane suddenly felt enormous in a way that had nothing to do with square footage. My daughter Melissa was 36 when her mother died. She flew in from Atlanta for the funeral, stayed 2 weeks, then went back to her life. Her husband Brandon came for the service and left the next morning. Business to attend to, he said. I remember thinking that was fine. People grieve differently. People have obligations. What I didn't understand then was that Brandon didn't leave because of business. Brandon left because he had already calculated that there was nothing worth staying for yet. The house on Wentworth Lane is a 1940s craftsman bungalow. 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a workshop in the back where I built furniture on weekends. I bought it in 1991 for $210,000 and watched it become something else entirely as Charleston transformed around it. By the time Carol died, the neighborhood had been discovered, coffee shops appeared. Young professionals moved in, my property appraised at $890,000. I know because I had it assessed the month after her funeral, just to understand what I owned. I didn't tell anyone about that number. Melissa called every Sunday. I appreciated that. We talked about her job managing a boutique hotel downtown, about her garden, about small things. Brandon occasionally got on the line to ask how I was doing, in a way that suggested he hoped the answer was brief. Fine, I'd say. Getting along. The first hint of what was coming arrived 14 months after Carol's death. Melissa mentioned, carefully, that Brandon's restaurant had hit some trouble. A second location he'd opened in Buckhead was underperforming. Overhead was a problem. They were managing, she said, but it was stressful. I said I was sorry to hear it. 3 weeks later, she asked if they could stay at the house for a little while, just until things stabilized. Brandon needed to be closer to a supplier contact in Charleston, and the commute from Atlanta was killing them. It would be temporary. A few months at most. My daughter, I reminded myself. Carol's daughter. The girl who used to hand me tools while I worked on the back porch, who learned to ride her bike in the driveway I'd poured myself. I said yes. They arrived on a Tuesday in March with a moving truck I hadn't been told about. Brandon supervised the movers with the authority of someone taking possession. He directed them to put his home office equipment in the 4th bedroom, his bar cart in the corner of the living room, his golf clubs in my workshop, where I built furniture. I said nothing. They were adjusting. It was temporary. The first year, Brandon's presence was tolerable. He was gone most days, allegedly working on the restaurant situation, and Melissa managed the tension between us with the practiced skill of someone who'd been doing it for years. She cooked Sunday dinners, kept the kitchen clean, asked about my projects. She was trying. I could see that. But Brandon had a way of making me feel like a guest. He'd change the television channel without asking when I was watching it. He'd invite his friends over on weekend afternoons, and the house would fill with men I didn't know drinking beer in my living room. He redid the thermostat schedule, said he needed it warmer for his back. He moved my workbench to a corner of the workshop to make room for a home gym setup he ordered and never used. Small things, the kind of things you tell yourself, aren't worth a confrontation. The second year, he stopped pretending to work on the restaurant. It had closed, quietly, somewhere around month 18. He never mentioned it directly. I found out from Melissa during one of our Sunday calls, which continued out of habit even though we now lived in the same house. What does he do all day? I asked her. He's consulting, she said. Networking. Something will come through. What came through was a lease on a Range Rover Sport. $44,000. The monthly payment appeared on a credit card statement I wasn't supposed to see, left on the kitchen counter while Brandon was showering. I didn't mean to look. I looked. Their combined income was Melissa's hotel manager's salary, around $67,000 a year. plus whatever consulting Brandon occasionally generated, which from what I could tell was somewhere between minimal and fictional. The Range Rover payment was $760 a month. The credit card balance was $22,000. They were hemorrhaging money, while I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the grocery bills, and the property taxes on a house I owned outright. I started keeping records, not because I planned anything specific yet. I kept records the way a contractor keeps records, because documentation is the difference between a handshake deal and a legal agreement, and I'd learned that lesson in my first year of business. I bought a small notebook, date, expense, observation, quiet and methodical. Year 3 brought a shift. Brandon had found his confidence again, or maybe he'd simply run out of reasons to pretend to be grateful. The comments started as jokes. Douglas, you really should let Melissa handle the groceries. She knows what we actually eat. Douglas, the furniture you make is charming, but it kind of clutters the living room, don't you think? Douglas, I've been reading about some really nice assisted living communities in Mount Pleasant, very active social scene for people your age. I was 62. I jogged 3 miles every morning. Melissa would tighten slightly when he said things like that, but she didn't push back. She'd learned not to push back against Brandon, I realized. That was a skill she'd developed long before they moved into my house. The clearest moment came on a Thursday evening in September. I'd been in the workshop, finishing a rocking chair I'd been building for a neighbor's anniversary gift. I came inside to find Brandon sitting at the kitchen table with 2 men I'd never seen, contracts spread across the surface. I asked what was going on. Brandon looked up with the mild irritation of someone interrupted during important work. Just a business meeting, Douglas. We'll be done in an hour. He turned back to his papers. In my kitchen. On my table. I poured myself a glass of water, went to my bedroom, and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. Carol's photograph was on the nightstand, the one from our anniversary trip to Asheville, her laughing at something I'd said, eyes bright. I looked at it and thought about what she would have said. She would have said, Douglas, you built that house. Don't let anyone make you feel like a visitor in it. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Robert Finley. I'd used him for contractor disputes for 20 years. He didn't specialize in property law, but he knew who did, and he referred me to a woman named Patricia Gould, who handled exactly the kind of situation I was describing. I told her everything. The informal arrangement, the no-contract living situation, the 3 years of expenses I'd covered, the documentation I'd been keeping. Patricia listened without interrupting. Then she said, Mr. Harlan, you've actually been quite careful, whether you realized it or not. The property is entirely in your name. There's no written agreement granting them tenancy rights. South Carolina law is actually fairly clear in situations like this. You can issue a formal notice to vacate. How long do they have? With proper notice? 30 days. I thanked her and asked her to prepare the documents, but to hold them. Not yet, I said. Soon. The trigger came 6 weeks later. I'd met a woman named Helen at a woodworking class I'd started attending at the community center, something I'd done to get out of the house on Tuesday evenings. Helen was 61, recently retired from a career in landscape architecture, with the kind of direct humor that reminded me of Carol without being Carol. We had coffee after the 3rd class, dinner after the 5th, and by November we were seeing each other twice a week. I mentioned her to Melissa first, privately. My daughter hugged me. She said she was glad I was getting out, glad I'd found someone who made me smile. Brandon's reaction, delivered at dinner 2 nights later, was different. He set down his fork and looked at me with something between amusement and contempt. So, you're bringing a woman into the house? He said it like I'd announced a renovation he hadn't approved. I told him I'd like Helen to come for dinner, to meet the family. His jaw tightened. This is our home, Douglas. We should have a say in who comes through here. Those 4 words. Our home. I kept my voice level. Whose name is on the deed, Brandon? He smiled, the practiced smile of a man who'd talked his way out of things for years. I'm just saying, it's a shared living situation. We all have to be comfortable. Melissa, back me up here. Melissa looked at her plate. That night, I retrieved Patricia Gould's number from my contacts. I sent her a text. Let's move forward. She responded in 4 minutes. I'll have the notice ready by end of week. The 30-day notice was delivered by certified mail on a Monday morning. I was at Helen's apartment when Melissa called. Her voice was unsteady. Dad, what is this? It's a formal notice to vacate, I said. You have 30 days to find alternate housing or to begin paying market rate rent of $2,800 a month. That's $200 below the current average for comparable properties in the neighborhood. So it's actually generous. Dad, we can't afford $2,800 a month. I know. Then what are we supposed to do? The same thing every adult in America does, Melissa. Find housing you can afford. She was quiet for a long time. Is this because of Helen? It's because Brandon called my house his home. It's because I've paid every bill in that house for 3 years and been made to feel like a liability. It's because you're my daughter, and I love you. But I've let this go on long enough. I heard her breathing. Then, quietly, I'll talk to Brandon. I already know what he'll say. The notice stands. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the notice was only the first piece. 2 years earlier, I had co-signed 2 loans for Brandon. The first was a business loan for the second restaurant location, $28,000. The second was a personal loan he'd taken to cover a tax liability he'd apparently accumulated before I'd ever met him, $14,500. Total outstanding balance across both, just over $38,000. I'd done it because Melissa asked, because she said it would help them get stable, because I was a father who wanted his daughter not to struggle. I called Patricia the same afternoon the notice went out. I want to initiate cosigner withdrawal on 2 loans, I said. I walked her through the details. She was quiet for a moment. Mr. Harlan, you understand what this will do to their debt-to-income ratio? That's the point. Without your income backing those loans, both lenders will likely call the balances due. They'll have 2 weeks to pay in full, find a new cosigner, or face collection and credit damage. I understand. You've thought this through. For about 18 months, actually. The call started the afternoon the notice arrived. 12 from Brandon by evening. I let them go to voicemail. I listened to the first one. His voice had dropped into a register I hadn't heard before, lower and more careful. The voice of a man recalibrating. Douglas, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let's sit down and talk about this like adults. I think we can work something out that makes everyone comfortable. I deleted it without listening to the rest. I spent that week at Helen's. She knew what was happening. I'd told her everything over the course of several dinners, and she had listened the way I'd learned she listened, completely, without rushing to fix anything. Without advice, unless I asked for it. On Friday, she asked how I was doing. I'm doing the thing I should have done 2 years ago, I said. So, mostly, I feel clear. She nodded. Clear is underrated. The next week, Melissa came to see me. Not at the house. She drove to Helen's apartment where she knew I was staying, and knocked on the door on a Wednesday afternoon. I stepped outside to talk to her. Helen gave us privacy. My daughter looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from living inside someone else's storm for too long. Dad, she said, Brandon is talking to a lawyer. Lithium. He says you're breaching some kind of implied tenancy agreement. That 3 years of living somewhere establishes rights. Patricia already addressed that. There's no written agreement, no rent ever paid, no documentation supporting tenancy rights. He's welcome to try. She looked at her hands. We have nowhere to go. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and felt the full weight of what the past 3 years had cost her. Not just financially. Something in her had dimmed. The woman standing in front of me was careful in a way she hadn't been before she married Brandon. Careful with her words, careful with her expressions, careful not to set anything off. Melissa, I said quietly, do you want me to tell you how to fix this? She looked up. Leave him. Take whatever you have in your own accounts, find an apartment, and leave him. And if you do that, you call me and I'll help you get on your feet. Her eyes went bright for a moment, then guarded. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's possible. And I'm saying whatever he's told you about what you can and can't do without him is probably not true. She didn't respond to that. She said she needed time to think. She drove away, and I watched her go and felt the particular helplessness of loving someone who isn't ready to be helped yet. The eviction hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in February. Patricia had filed all documentation. Property deed showing sole ownership, utility records showing I was the sole account holder, tax records, insurance records, 3 years of grocery and household expenses I had logged, the 30-day notice with certified mail confirmation. Everything in order. Brandon had retained an attorney, a young man named Curtis, who wore a suit that was slightly too large and spoke with the energy of someone trying to manufacture urgency. He argued hardship, He argued implied tenancy. He argued that the abrupt nature of the notice constituted bad faith, that I had effectively been a landlord for 3 years without formalizing any agreement. The judge, a man named Honorable James Whitaker, who had the expression of someone who had heard every variation of this particular story, let Curtis finish. Then he turned to Patricia. Patricia presented the documentation. She did not editorialize. She simply walked through the record. Property deed, utilities, taxes, expenses, the 30-day notice, proof of delivery, and the complete absence of any payment, contribution, or signed agreement establishing tenancy rights. Judge Whitaker looked at Brandon. "Sir, did you ever pay rent to Mr. Harlan?" Brandon straightened slightly. "It was a family arrangement. Formalized rent wasn't. Yes or no, sir?" "No." "Did you contribute to utilities, property taxes, maintenance, or insurance?" "We contributed in other ways. Financial contributions. Yes or no?" "No." "Did any written agreement exist promising you could remain in the property indefinitely?" There was an understanding." Judge Whitaker held up his hand. "An understanding is not a legal instrument." He reviewed the papers in front of him for a moment. "Mr. Harlan owns this property. He issued proper notice. He offered reasonable rental terms. The defendants declined to pay or vacate. I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff. You have 21 days to vacate 1140 Wentworth Lane. If you fail to comply, the sheriff will enforce with a writ of possession." He brought down the gavel. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the same thing I felt when a structural problem in a building was finally correctly diagnosed. Relief. The satisfaction of a problem named and addressed. Curtis started to request an extension. The judge declined. They'd had 30 days before the hearing. 21 was already generous. In the hallway afterward, Brandon walked past me without a word. His jaw was set and his face was the color of someone suppressing something large. Melissa walked a few steps behind him. She glanced at me once. I nodded. She looked away. The next day, the first lender called to confirm my cosigner withdrawal. The second called the day after. Patricia had submitted both notices the morning the eviction hearing concluded, timed precisely. Brandon called me 4 times the following afternoon. I answered on the 5th. "What did you do?" His voice had lost the polish. "You pulled your name off the loans. They're calling the balances due. Do you understand what that means for us?" "I do, actually. We can't pay $38,000. We don't have that. Our credit, natural consequences, Brandon. This is vindictive. This is a vendetta. This is cause and effect. You've been living rent-free in my home for 3 years while treating me like a problem to be managed. I withdrew from loans I signed voluntarily, which I am legally entitled to do, particularly given that the circumstances under which I signed them have materially changed. If you want to call that a vendetta, that's your choice. You're going to destroy us. I didn't build what you're standing on, Brandon. You borrowed it. There's a difference." I ended the call. 2 weeks before the vacate deadline, I met with a real estate agent named Susan Park, who'd sold 3 properties in the neighborhood that year. She walked through the house, made notes, and gave me a number. 920,000, she said. Possibly higher. The market in this pocket is competitive right now. I asked her to list it the moment the house was vacant. The deadline came on a Thursday. Patricia confirmed with the county that Melissa and Brandon had vacated the previous day. They'd left behind a bedroom set and some boxes in the garage, which became my property to dispose of as I chose. A neighbor told me they'd seen a rental truck the previous evening. She'd waved at Melissa. Melissa had waved back but hadn't stopped to talk. I drove to Wentworth Lane and walked through the empty rooms. My house. The floors Carol and I had refinished together in 2004. The kitchen we'd renovated over one long summer. My workshop in the back, Brandon's unused gym equipment still in the corner, which I moved to the curb that afternoon. I stood in the middle of the living room for a while. Then I went home, meaning Helen's apartment, meaning the place I'd been spending most nights for the past 2 months, the place where I felt like myself. Susan listed the property the following Monday. By Thursday, she had 4 offers. The final accepted price was $940,000, cash buyer, a couple relocating from Boston who wanted to close in 6 weeks. I walked away with net proceeds of $847,000 after the remaining mortgage and closing costs. 44 years after buying that house for Carol, I sold it to strangers who would love it the way it deserved to be loved. I cried on the drive home, not from regret, from the particular grief of closing a chapter that held the best years of your life. I let myself feel it completely. Then I moved on. 3 months after the sale closed, I heard from Melissa. A letter, handwritten, 4 pages. She'd left Brandon 2 weeks after the eviction. She was renting a small apartment near the hotel where she worked. She was in therapy. She was starting to understand, she wrote, how much of herself she'd set aside over 8 years of managing him. She wrote, I'm sorry I let him treat you that way in your own home. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I was just keeping him comfortable. Those aren't the same thing, and I know that now. She wasn't asking for anything. She said she needed time before she could face me. She said she hoped I was well. She said she was glad I had Helen. I read the letter twice, put it in my desk drawer, and sat for a while. Then I called her. She answered on the second ring, surprised. I'm glad you wrote, I said. Are you angry at me? I said honestly. Not anymore. She was quiet. Dad, where are you living? Helen and I found a place in the South Slope neighborhood. 2 bedrooms. A workshop space. Good light in the mornings. That sounds like you. It does feel like me. First time in a while. I heard her exhale. That's all I wanted to hear. We talked for an hour. The first real conversation we'd had in years. Without performance or management or the careful navigation around a third presence in the room. She sounded younger than she had in a long time. Exhausted, but younger. Before she hung up, she said, I'm going to earn this back, Dad. I don't expect you to just let me back in. I know I have to show you. That's all I need, I said. Just show me. By June, I had found a property I wanted. A 1930s craftsman on Sullivan's Island, close enough to the water that you could hear it from the back porch on quiet mornings. It needed work. The kitchen was original. The electrical needed updating. One of the bathrooms had water damage behind the tiles that the previous owners hadn't bothered to address. I knew exactly what it needed. I'd spent 35 years knowing what houses needed. I made a cash offer and closed in 3 weeks. The first thing I did after the keys were in my hand was walk into the empty workshop space, set my toolbox down, and stand in the silence for a moment. Then I started measuring. Helen came by that evening with dinner. We ate on the back porch and listened to the water. She asked if I had any regrets. I thought about it the way I tried to think about most things now, without rushing to a comfortable answer. I regret waiting so long, I said. 3 years is a long time to let something go in the wrong direction, because you don't want to be the one who causes a scene. She nodded. But you got there. I got there. Which is the difference between people who figure things out eventually and people who never do. I figured it out. She laughed at that. Very humble of you. I'm a work in progress. She reached over and took my hand. We sat there until it got dark. And then we sat there a little longer, because there was nowhere else I needed to be, and nothing I needed to manage, and no one whose moods I had to predict and absorb. Just the sound of the water and the cooling air and the feeling of a life that fit the shape of the person actually living it. I thought about Brandon sometimes, not with anger, more the way you think about a bad roof you once had to replace, not fondly, but with a detached recognition that it needed to go before it caused real damage. His credit was gone. The Range Rover had been repossessed the same week the loans were called. Melissa had told me he was back in Atlanta, living with a college friend, talking about a new business idea. I hoped he figured something out. I genuinely did. Not for his sake particularly, but because the alternative meant Melissa might feel obligated to rescue him, and she'd done enough of that already. Melissa came to see the Sullivan's Island house in July. She stood in the workshop space and ran her hand along the workbench I'd installed and asked me what I was building. A blanket chest first, I said. Then maybe a dining table. Depends what the house tells me it needs. She smiled. That's very you, Dad. It is, I agreed. We had dinner on the back porch, the 3 of us, Melissa and Helen and me, and the conversation was easy in the way conversations are, when nobody's performing and nobody's afraid, and everybody at the table actually chose to be there. Before she left, Melissa hugged me for a long time. I let her. I love you, Dad. I love you too. She drove off, and Helen and I cleaned up the dishes, and I went out to the workshop and turned on the light and picked up where I'd left off, measuring wood for the chest, making marks, taking the time to get it right the first time. The tools in my hands felt like what they'd always been, an extension of knowing what something needs and having the patience to give it that. Some things are worth building carefully. Some things you have to tear down first before you can build them right. I'd learned the difference. That was enough. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories, and tell me in the comments, has someone ever confused your generosity for weakness? I'd love to hear your story. And click the box on the right for the next one. Thank you for watching. There's a version of this story where I keep quiet, where I absorb the comments, swallow the disrespect, tell myself it's just the way things are now, and wait for something to change on its own. I lived that version for 3 years. It didn't change anything. It just gave people more time to get comfortable treating me like a piece of furniture they hadn't decided whether to keep. What Douglas's story taught me, what it taught me about my own life, is that patience and passivity are not the same thing. I spent years confusing them. I thought staying calm, not reacting, not making waves, was a kind of strength. But there's a point where staying calm just means you've stopped expecting better. And expecting less from people who should know better isn't peace. It's slow erosion. The hard truth is that Brandon didn't become who he was overnight. He tested small things first. The thermostat, the workshop, the kitchen table. Each time there was no real consequence. The next move got bigger. That's not a character flaw unique to him. That's how entitlement works in any relationship. It expands into whatever space it's given. The only thing that stops it is a boundary that actually holds. What I keep coming back to is the notebook. The fact that Douglas started keeping records quietly, without announcing it, without threatening anyone, not out of resentment, but out of clarity. He'd seen enough of the world to understand that documentation is just preparation in written form. And preparation is what separates people who get to choose their outcomes from people who have outcomes chosen for them. That's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. The intelligence required to protect yourself isn't aggressive. It's quiet. It's paying attention, writing things down, building your case before you need it, knowing your rights before someone tries to take them. Douglas didn't win because he got loud. He won because he'd been thinking clearly for a long time before anyone realized he was thinking at all. And then there's Melissa. Her part of this story is the one that lingers longest with me. She wasn't a villain. She was someone who had learned to keep the peace at the cost of herself. Someone who had spent so long managing one person's moods that she'd forgotten what it felt like to just be honest. It took losing everything, the house, the arrangement, the false security, before she could finally stop and look at what she'd actually built her life around. That's a different kind of consequence, not punishment, just the natural result of choices made over a long stretch of time. The same way a house develops rot if water gets in, and nobody fixes it not because the house deserved it, but because the problem was real and ignored long enough. What I take from Douglas's story is this. The people who try to make you feel small in your own space are almost always counting on you to stay quiet about it. They're counting on your love for them, your desire to avoid conflict, your willingness to forgive faster than they earn it. The moment you stop cooperating with that calculation, the entire arrangement falls apart. Not because you destroyed anything, because you simply stopped holding it together for them. You are not obligated to subsidize someone else's contempt. Not with your money, not with your home, not with your silence. Choosing yourself is not cruelty. It's just the decision to stop waiting for someone to value what you were giving away for free.